gentlemen, this is Watson Michael from Ceylon Institute of English and Leadership. And today, for the very first time, we are honored to have Joe Heagney, author of the international bestseller Fundamentals of Project Management that has sold over 255,000 copies worldwide and translated into multiple languages. Joe, welcome to our show. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you very much, Michael. Great to be here. Great to see you, and happy to be talking to everybody.
It's an absolute honor. So, Joe, why did you name the book Fundamentals of Project Management?
Michael, it really is self-evident in some ways because it's a fundamentals book. It's about the tools and techniques and methods for managing projects, for not only for beginners, but for people who might be struggling with their projects. When you think about the term fundamentals, you think about a foundation, and that's what the book covers. It covers all of the tools that you need to master as you manage a project, planning, scheduling, and controlling a project. Planning, absolutely crucial, probably the most important thing. And if you go through the progression of processes that are involved with managing projects, you begin with identifying the objective of the project, right? The scope of work, and then planning, the backbone of planning, work breakdown structure, identifying specifically tasks and subtasks. Once you do that, you move into scheduling, estimating durations, understanding task relationships. How do the tasks relate to each other? What has to happen first, second, third? What can be done at the same time? And that will lead you to your logic diagram. Some people call it a network diagram, a logic diagram, a precedence diagram. Three terms, by the way, Michael, that mean the same thing. They're interchangeable. That will allow you to then identify your critical path. And I'll talk more about that in a little bit. After you move out of that, you go to controlling your project, managing risk, managing change. Risk management, a big deal. I'll talk more about that as well in a little bit. Managing change. Managing change is probably the second potent weapon to fight scope creep. Scope creep, what does that mean? Well, when you start out with a certain scope of work and it begins creeping upward and outward in all different directions, well, you need something to keep it in check. First potent weapon is a really good scope statement. Second potent weapon is change control. And after you get out of control, you're into closing out the project. And that's where, Michael, I'll just emphasize the fact that you need to be disciplined when you close out a project. Most of us, we humans, tend to let down at the end. And when I teach my courses and in my book, I emphasize the fact that you need to be disciplined. Make sure you do the things you need to do when you close out the project. Checklists, lessons learned, central repository, things like that. So the key to project management, and the reason why I call it fundamentals, is because the book covers all of those fundamental core principles.
Great. Thank you for that explanation. So now project management is vital to succeed. But could you elaborate why? Because there are several people out there, they don't know about the subject and its benefits.
Yeah, interesting question. It really is, because project managers obviously need to learn the tools of managing projects. But when you think about it, think about any job you've ever had. And when I teach my classes, when I actually put in the book, the fact that almost everybody at some point manages a project. And I would think if anybody listening to this now thinks about the work they did last week, last month, this year, could probably identify a project that they worked on, right? What is a project? A project is something that has a beginning and an end, has multiple tasks and subtasks, multiple people that need to be managed. And so that's why it's such an important topic. And I'll tell you this, it's so popular. It's so popular might not be the proper word. It's so in demand. And I think that's one of the reasons for the success of the fundamentals book, because people realize that, you know what, yeah, I do manage a project. They might be browsing a bookstore and they might not be a project manager, but they take a look at the back of the book or the introduction and they say, yeah, these tools can help me. So that's why I think it's really, really an important topic.
Yes. So now Scrum, it helps people and companies to make better decisions. Could you elaborate more about Scrum?
Yes. And you know, Scrum is a really fascinating topic because it's become very popular. It's run into some speed bumps. It born of software development, and now it's expanding into other project realms. But obviously, it's the framework for agile project management because that's what it is. It's agile. It emphasizes collaboration, adaptability, where you're managing iterative operations, and it focuses on sprints. Okay, smaller, manageable chunks or units of work, and very, very effective if it's done correctly. It requires more training. It requires, I think, and most of my colleagues, experience. One of the problems you run into with Scrum these days is that there's a little bit of overreach where people are excited about the process of Scrum, and they should be, but you really need to have a foundation of experience and people, and as I said, collaboration. So I'm excited about it. It's taking off, and it's very successful in many areas, mostly technical IT, complex projects, and it can be done well, but it requires more focus. I call it fun on the run when I get involved with it, because of the sprint, but it can be very, very effective. It's proving to be effective.
Yeah, so I totally agree with you because, and one key thing which you mentioned was about being focused. Okay, so that's what many people need to be today. This there are so many distractions out there, and many people are always glued to their phones, even at meetings, even while having dinner, right? So it's sometimes the phone is dividing the smartphone is dividing people these days, right? So yeah.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. The focus is required, no doubt about it. And really, the difference when you think about it from a project perspective, when you think about the fundamentals of project management, you move from one process to the next to the next. You obviously need the focus, but the process you can rely on. When you're dealing with Scrum and sprints, that's where you have to have a strong leader, and as I said, some really good experience on the team itself. So you're right.
Yeah. So can you elaborate about any chapter in your book?
Yes. Thank you for that question, because I have my favorite chapter. I mean, they're all important because fundamentals are what they are. but I have my favorite chapters, and my favorite chapter is the one focusing on risk and communication, the risk plan and the communication plan. Now, for a couple of reasons, when you talk about risk management, Michael, it's something that I didn't do as a young man when I first got into project management. I wasn't trained, right? I was working for Grumman Aerospace, and there wasn't a lot of training going on, not a lot of funding, and so they threw us into the fire. And you know what? My results showed it. My projects were not very successful. Why? One of the big reasons is because I didn't understand what could go wrong, and I didn't have any backup plans. And once I did get trained, I realized that managing risk is key. It's being proactive rather than reactive. And that's one of the central tenets of any successful project, which I get into in detail in chapter 6. Again, risk and communication. And you know what? I'll go through it quickly. You talk about identifying the risks. Step 1, steps 2 and 3, you have to get some separation. Not all risks are created equal. So you need to get prioritization, all right? Probability of occurrence, negative impact should the risk become real. So you've got to get some separation. Some risks are going to demand more of your attention than others, and that's how you do that. Once you do steps 1, 2, and 3, you can go on to steps 4, 5, and 6. Prevent or mitigation. Some risks can be prevented, and if they can, get rid of them. Don't even deal with them. Step 5 is the backbone of your risk plan: contingencies. If the risk becomes real, what will you do, you and your team? And that's where you really save yourself, save your project. Step 6 is the trigger point, and it really is true to its name. It should be a point in time, or if the risk has to do with money, budget, it would probably be a dollar threshold that you cross. So those are the 6 steps that I get into in chapter 6 in detail, and I give the reader great examples from my background of how it helped me. The second part of that chapter is communication, and I'll tell you, Michael, communication is one of the things that everybody, if I were to ask you how important is communication to any project you managed, you would probably say very important. Yes? And everybody agrees with that. But the interesting thing is, almost, I would say 30% of project managers do anything about it. In other words, only about 30% have a risk plan. I'm sorry, a communication plan, my error. And it's one of the things that I emphasize in the book, the fact that when you're done reading the book, I would like every reader to commit to having a plan regarding how they communicate with their team, with their stakeholders, with their sponsor, with their customer, client. It's crucial. And so, again, that's why I'm really a fan of chapter 6.
Absolutely. I love what you said, Joe, because communication is vital, and it's how we elaborate and how we speak to someone, right? Sometimes there are times, right, we speak to some people, but later we regret, like, okay, why did we say like that? Okay, can the communication have been better? Right?
Oh,
So,
man, no doubt about it.
yeah, great. So, how does project management help to cut down unnecessary expenses? And can you give us an example?
Oh, sure. About expenses and cost and budget, for sure. And, we always talk about the triangle: scope, time, and cost. It's your job when you manage a project. I emphasize this again in the book, to make sure you keep that triangle balanced. And there's an old axiom in the project world: you can have it good, fast, or cheap. Pick any two, right? You can't have all three. And I'll give you two examples. One is from my Grumman Aerospace days. They threw us onto a team. Actually, I was a team member. I wasn't even managing projects then, but we were tasked with coming up with a paperless purchasing system. This was, again, I'm a bit older than you and perhaps a lot of our listeners, but I lived through the transition from paper to digital. And so we were moving to a paperless purchasing system, and they had me on the team. And it was a good team, but the project failed because when we did a deep dive into a post-project audit, lessons learned, we found that the team that was put together forgot two actually really important things. One, the end user, a buyer, right? So it turned out that it became much more costly. This paperless purchasing system that we delivered was more costly because we didn't refer to the key individuals, the customer of the project, and also the powers that be chose an off-the-shelf system that saved money up front, but when you look at the failure of the project, cost way more in the end. Just goes to show you, most projects succeed or fail up front. I'll tie that into this idea of cost. The other example that I want to talk to you about is the cost, perhaps not necessarily about money, although I know budget is the topic that you asked me about, but for a time I did a project, I helped out on a project, again, early years, F-14 jet. And you know the movie Top Gun? Are you familiar with that, Tom Cruise?
Yes, of course.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
the original Top Gun, the new one was good. The original was even better. Anyway, there was a pilot that in the movie, I think his name was Goose. Unfortunately, he ejected into the canopy and he died. But you know what, Michael? That was really happening in real life. I worked for Grumman. Grumman built the F-14 jet, and it was a big deal. And the Navy came to us and they said, look, fix this problem. We can't lose any more pilots. It was, a tragedy. And they gave us a blank check, kind of. They said, we don't care what it costs. Fix it. We can't lose any more pilots. And so that's an example of where cost, it's always an important factor on any project that most of our listeners, wrestle with, but not always. You have to think about the cost, certainly of budget, but also of quality. In that example that I just gave, the F-14 quality was number one, cost was at the bottom. That's not going to happen that often. No, you're not going to get a blank check. That was the only time it ever happened to me. But you have to understand the balance of cost, scope, and time.
Absolutely. It's very important. Yeah. So you're always not going to get a blank check. And Joe, when you said the goose, I just remembered. Okay, it's not in the subject actually, but before the COVID, there was this walking track where people go and exercise. So I as well, I used to go there, and there were a lot of ducks, and there were a lot of hens, and there was a goose, right? It was a male, female, and there was a baby goose as well. So I saw the fellow growing up actually, and sometimes the three of them used to swim together. But then after the pandemics eased, and when it was okay, I went there and I couldn't find them, right? But I took a lot of photos. So when you said goose, it reminds me of that. Okay.
Very, very interesting. Yeah. No doubt.
Okay. So What was one of the most challenging things you ever faced, and how did project management help you to overcome it?
Excellent. Thank you for that question. You know, when I was hired by the American Management Association, they're 48th and Broadway in Manhattan. That's where I worked. I worked for them full time for about 5 years, and now I do courses for them. But I had a job where I was tasked with expanding their project management product line. And I was a global practice leader for AMA. And yeah, I have to tell you, it was a big challenge for me because I was I had managed projects for many years and I was well versed in project management, but I hadn't expanded a product line in the adult education industry. So, I talked to one of my course leaders. I'll share his name. His name Steve Gershenson, great guy, very exceptional project manager and instructor. But anyway, he said, "Hey Joe, why don't you think about treating it as a project?" And I did. And so this was one of the most challenging projects that I had done, simply because of the unknown unknowns. I didn't know a lot, and so I treated it as any other project I had ever managed. And I planned, I scheduled, and I controlled it. I started out with a SMART objective: specific, measurable, agreed to, realistic, and time bound. A lot of our listeners are probably familiar with that. And once I did that, I created a work breakdown structure. And again, I was time limited. I had to do this in 4 months. And I identified my critical path. For those of our listeners who aren't as familiar, the critical path is the path on your schedule, your Gantt chart, named after Henry Gantt, no mystery. And anything on the critical path has zero extra time to complete. Zero float or slack or wiggle room. So I identified that, and then I created my risk plan, my communication plan, and change. I created a change process, and you know what? It was successful, but it was a challenge because of the unknowns. And I'd like our listeners to think about that, because most projects are created because they haven't been done before. They have not been done before. So you get a project, it's on you, and you've got to go through be disciplined to go through the project processes that I just talked about. You need discipline, and if you do that, it helped me in that example. If they do that, if you do that as a listener, you'll really find out that you're successful more often than not.
Absolutely. And the most important word again, be disciplined. Okay.
Discipline. Absolutely, Michael. Yeah. Disciplines in project management, it really is one of the key tenets. No doubt about it. That's what I found.
Absolutely. So, Joe, any final message to our viewers and listeners out there?
Oh, well, yes. One of the things that I always let, and I emphasize this again in the book, there's a chapter on project leadership, project manager as leader. Don't forget the people, okay? Because quite often, people getting into project management, people who may want to buy a fundamentals book, and uh, they think about, well, Microsoft Project or Primavera or projects or all of the software that's out there. You have to keep in mind that, yes, especially today in 2025, project software is crucial. I mean, just lean on it whenever you can. But the software doesn't manage the project for you. It's you and your team. And it may not be a formal team. A lot of people who buy this fundamentals book, they may not have a formal team. They may be the team, but they have people that help them from outside their department or other parts of their organization. And you have to keep in mind that you have to consider yourself a leader, right? It's not about the software, it's about you leading the people who are helping you on the project. And what does that mean? It means you have to think about persuasion, you have to think about motivation, you have to think about influence. And so keep that in mind. It's very, very important because all of those topics, and I get into this in the book in that chapter on project leadership. You're going to have to deal with disagreements, conflict, and so remember, lead your project, don't just manage it.
Absolutely. Wise words, Joe. And thank you very much for taking time and doing this podcast with us.
So happy to be with you, Michael, and I really hope everybody gets a lot out of my book.
Absolutely.